In our headlines on this Thursday, April 3rd, here in South Korea. President Yoon will not be attending his ruling session scheduled for tomorrow, that is Friday at 11 in the morning at the Constitutional Court. And tension is mounting within political parties at the parliament as the court's ruling looks to have immense impact on the future direction of party policies. Meanwhile, the Trump administration announces a 26% reciprocal tariff on South Korea, as well as a new baseline tariff of 10% on all imports.
결연한 구국의 의지로 비상계엄을 선포하였습니다.
The Constitutional Court's ruling on President Yoon Suk-yeol's fate tomorrow may lead to a number of potential scenarios. Our correspondent Oh Soo-young tells us what they are.
The fate of President Yoon Suk-yeol and the nation hangs on the Constitutional Court's decision on his impeachment on Friday. The ruling will mean immediate consequences regarding the governance of the country, as the leader's removal or reinstatement spells out very different outcomes. If the court upholds the impeachment, Yoon would become the nation's second president in history to be removed from office, following Park Geun-hye's impeachment 8 years ago. Effective immediately, Yoon would have to vacate his office for good and leave the official residence in Yongsan-gu district. He would lose all post-presidential privileges, no pension, no office, no staff support, and no burial rights at the National Cemetery. His protection would be limited to basic personal security. With the leadership vacuum made permanent, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo would continue as acting president until an early election is held within 60 days. On the flip side, if the impeachment is dismissed with prejudice, it would mean the court has found the National Assembly's grounds for his removal insufficient, and the case is closed for good. After over 3 months of suspension, the president would immediately resume his duties. It's expected he'd then address the public through a televised message or press conference. His first tasks back in office are likely to focus first on foreign policy and national security, as there has not been top-level engagement with the United States since President Donald Trump's inauguration. Yoon would also begin laying out proposals for constitutional and political reform as pledged during his final court appearance. While his impeachment case would be closed for good, Yoon would still face investigations regarding his December 3rd martial law declaration, but during his presidency, be immune from charges other than for treason and insurrection. Another scenario is the court dismissing the case without prejudice. The case would be dropped due to legal or procedural issues, meaning the bench decided not to rule on the grounds or evidence presented. The president would return to office, but the National Assembly could reattempt impeachment in the future. 6 or more justices must consent to uphold an impeachment. 3 or more justices deciding against impeachment would lead to a dismissal. While sources say the justices have reached an understanding on the verdict, they're likely to sign off on their decision at the very last minute, either in the evening before or early in the morning of the ruling. This is to maintain utmost confidentiality. The ruling takes legal effect the moment the presiding justice reads the decision on live TV. President Yoon's lawyers told press on Thursday that the suspended leader has decided not to go to the court to hear his verdict in person, taking into account the need to maintain public order and presidential security arrangements. In past impeachment cases, former Presidents Park Geun-hye and Roh Moo-hyun did not attend their ruling sessions. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And as we count down fewer than 24 hours now to the Constitutional Court's ruling on the president's fate, the atmosphere around the venue of the court is intense, to say the least. For more on this, I have my colleague Song Yoo-jin standing by live. Yoo-jin, welcome. So what have you been seeing and hearing there ahead of tomorrow's verdict?
Right, Sunny, I'm currently right outside the Constitutional Court, as you can see behind me. And compared to the very loud, intense demonstrations we've been seeing and reporting over the past few weeks, protests that have turned these usually quiet streets into a political flashpoint, I can definitely say that the area surrounding the Constitutional Court today is noticeably subdued. The only thing we can see leading right up to the Constitutional Court's main gate is heavy police presence, as well as police buses and barricades and fences as well. And that's because authorities have implemented tighter security measures ahead of tomorrow's ruling by the Constitutional Court. And so you can really see the heightened security measures on the screen right now. So starting from today, not just today, but as you can see right on the screen, the area within a 150-meter radius of the Constitutional Court has been designated as a so-called vacuum zone, which is an area that locks down any vehicles and protests. So currently, only pedestrians are allowed within this zone to keep disruption to a minimum, but also to minimize the risk of threats to the court. I also want to mention that we had to present our press IDs to the police to access the street leading to the court's main gate, which really shows how much emphasis the police is putting on public safety. But beyond that perimeter, the mood is very different, because outside the restricted zone near Anguk Station, both pro and anti-impeachment demonstrators have gathered, holding signs and chanting, awaiting the Constitutional Court's decision. And as the day progresses, we are expected to see this crowd grow even more.
Right, Eugene, and of course all that underscores just how high the stakes are there. What more can you tell us about the safety precautions in place by authorities there?
Well, public safety has been top of the agenda ever since the Constitutional Court announced this Tuesday that it will deliver its verdict on President Yoon tomorrow morning. Now, just a reminder that back in 2017, when the court upheld former President Park Geun-hye's impeachment, 4 demonstrators died during protests and clashes that broke out in response to the ruling. And so to prevent any of this from happening, starting from 9 a.m. today, the police has issued and elevated its emergency alert level to Ulho, which is the second highest among its 3-tier emergency response system. Now, under this system, it allows for up to half of the available national police forces to be mobilized. And already 7,000 police officers have reportedly been deployed across Seoul. And starting at midnight, that alert will be raised to the highest level, Kapo, which enables full nationwide police mobilization. So first, take a listen to the head of Seoul's police agency for more.
We expect a large turnout on the day of the ruling, and we'll do everything we can to manage the crowds and maintain public order. We'll take a zero-tolerance approach to any serious illegal acts, such as violence or destruction of property. We're also closely monitoring threats made online, and will respond swiftly to any signs of potential terrorism or intimidation.
So tomorrow, 14,000 riot polices will be on duty across Seoul. Talking about public transportation as well, starting at 4 p.m. today, we heard that no trains will be stopping at Anguk Station. And tomorrow, in the area nearby the Constitutional Court, some schools, banks, museums, and businesses will either shut down or switch to remote work for the day. With an estimated 100,000 demonstrators expected to take to the streets, the nation is on high alert, hoping to avoid any violence between opposing groups or confrontations with the police. That's all I have for now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Eugene, thank you for the latest on the atmosphere around the venue of the Constitutional Court. Moving forward, then, tensions are also running high at the parliament as lawmakers await in anticipation the verdict that also holds immense implications for party plans going forward. Our National Assembly correspondent Shin Ha-young reports.
Ahead of the ruling on President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial, the political standoff at the National Assembly continues, with rival parties holding different expectations for the outcome. The ruling People Power Party expects the Constitutional Court to dismiss the impeachment and for President Yoon to return to office. If Yoon is reinstated, the PPP plans to push for a constitutional amendment to fit present-day values. Yoon said earlier that he would not cling to power, but instead pursue constitutional reform. Interim PPP leader Kwon Young-se on Thursday reaffirmed that the party will accept the court's ruling and urged the opposition to do the same.
The PPP and I will accept the Constitutional Court's impeachment ruling and prepare for what comes next. We strongly urge the Democratic Party to deeply reflect on its actions and accept the outcome.
Kwon also urged the court to deliver a ruling that the public can accept to minimize conflict and confusion. Some PPP lawmakers decided to hold an overnight sit-in near Anguk Station close to the Constitutional Court until Friday morning. On the other hand, the main opposition Democratic Party argues that Yoon's removal is the only option, urging the court for a unanimous decision to impeach Yoon. The DP lawmakers have stepped up their protests, holding an all-night sit-in at their tent set up in Gwanghwamun Square for outdoor rallies. DP floor leader Park Chan-dae said there is enough evidence to prove Yoon's impeachment.
There is already overwhelming evidence to justify Yoon's removal. I have no doubt that the court will remove him from office for violating the Constitution.
While the National Assembly has tightened security, restricting outside personnel from entering the premises, both parties have ordered their lawmakers to stay on standby at the parliament this week. Amid growing political tension between the rival parties as the impeachment ruling approaches, there are calls for politicians to prioritize national unity after the verdict. 신하영, Arirang News.
As promised on Tuesday, U.S. time, after Wall Street closed its trading for the day, U.S. President Donald Trump announced his reciprocal tariffs on America's trade partners that includes a baseline of 10% on all imports into the American market and country-specific duties with 26% for South Korea. Our Euni has details.
The 26% reciprocal tariff imposition on South Korea has become official as U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday local time signed an executive order imposing a sweeping reciprocal tariff plan. According to the panel presented by President Trump, South Korea would face a 25% tariff. However, an annex to the executive order later released by the White House listed South Korea's rate as 26% with no clear explanation for the discrepancy.
It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. God bless you and God bless America. Thank you, everybody.
Trump announced a baseline tariff of 10% on all imports, set to take effect on April 5th. Higher rates will be imposed on select countries, which he labeled as the worst offenders and are scheduled to take effect on April 9th. South Korea faces a 26% reciprocal tariff, higher than the EU's 20% and Japan's 24%. Major U.S. trading partners will also be subject to steep tariff rates, including 34% on China, which will come in addition to existing 20% tariffs on Chinese imports, for a total 54% tariff rate. In response, a number of countries have announced plans for retaliatory measures, signaling a global escalation in the current trade war. The European Union says it will respond through legal, legitimate, proportionate, and decisive measures. The Chinese Commerce Ministry urged the Trump administration to cancel the tariffs and said China would take countermeasures to safeguard its interests. The Canadian Prime Minister said Canada will fight the decision with purpose and with force, while Italy's leader responded by calling the tariffs wrong and not in the interest of either party. The reciprocal tariffs do not apply to certain goods, including semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, energy, or certain minerals that aren't found in the U.S. However, according to a White House official, Trump is planning additional tariffs targeting semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and potentially critical minerals. 이은희, Arirang News.
And the White House's announcement of a 26% tariff on South Korea is prompting fresh alarm over bilateral trade as both government officials and corporate leaders attempt to understand the broader repercussions of this latest decision by the Trump administration. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryan reports.
The Trump administration's latest round of tariffs has sparked concerns for South Korea's export-dependent economy. The 26% tariff imposed on South Korean exports to the U.S. is notably higher than what many analysts had anticipated, especially given the existing free trade agreement between the two countries. The rate surpasses the tariffs applied to other U.S. allies such as the European Union and Japan, making it the highest among Washington's FTA partners. Experts say there are several reasons why Washington is citing Seoul's tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods as a key factor behind the levies.
The U.S. appears to be focusing on the agricultural sector because it has a high volume of agricultural exports. Also, South Korea's trade surplus with the U.S. was originally below $50 to $60 billion. If a trade deficit with a specific country rapidly increases over a few years, U.S. federal law requires an investigation, and appropriate measures can be taken in response.
These tariffs mark a clear shift in U.S. trade policy, reinforcing a protectionist stance that makes no exceptions, even for close allies. For South Korea, this necessitates a shift in strategy from pledging investments in the U.S.
Trump just says, thanks for the investment, tariff is working, so now we're going to put on tariffs on everybody, including you. So I think what may work, though, is that try to work some so-called pro-quid pro. We're going to make this investment if you do not increase the tariffs.
Beyond reciprocal tariffs, levies on auto exports, which took effect shortly after midnight in Washington, are expected to hit hard.
Half of all cars exported abroad are shipped to the U.S., meaning Hyundai and Kia will take the biggest hit. In particular, Korea's GM branch, which sends roughly 85% of its vehicles to the U.S., is likely to suffer a direct blow.
This has prompted officials in Seoul to respond. Acting President Han Duck-soo swiftly convened an emergency meeting to discuss support measures for affected industries, while Trade Minister An Duk-gun met with industry insiders to pledge high-level negotiations with Washington and the rapid rollout of countermeasures. With the Trump administration threatening levies on semiconductors, South Korea now faces mounting pressure to secure a deal or risk further slowdown in its manufacturing sector. 문혜련, Arirang News.
The local stock market ended down in response to the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs. The Kospi surrendered 0.7% to close its trade on this Thursday at 2,486.7. The index plunged 2.7% at the start of its session today to open at around 2,437, but it regained some ground in the course of the day. Separately, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok has said relevant authorities are closely monitoring the stock market and are poised to intervene in the event of excessive fluctuations. Over in Brussels this past Wednesday, Foreign Minister Cho Tae-il sat down with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte to discuss defense cooperation. On the agenda were security concerns shared between Europe and the Indo-Pacific, such as the military collaboration between North Korea and Russia. Minister Cho emphasized the importance of partnership between countries here in this part of the world, including South Korea and NATO. This importance was echoed by Mr. Rutte, who also called for expanded cooperation between South Korea and NATO members. Seoul also reaffirmed its commitment to Ukraine, pledging $2 billion in reconstruction support on top of last year's $400 million contribution. Over in Myanmar, the death toll from the country's devastating earthquake continues to mount, with the latest count showing over 3,000 losses of lives, that is, as a temporary ceasefire seeks to advance the search for loved ones and to ensure relief support. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
In a bid to speed up relief and reconstruction efforts following last week's magnitude 7.7 earthquake that struck Myanmar, the military government on Wednesday announced a temporary ceasefire. In a statement, the State Administration Council announced the ceasefire from April 2nd to April 22nd. However, according to local media MRTV, the military junta warned that if rebel groups attack, the military will take necessary measures. Earlier this week, the rebel Three Brotherhood Alliance, which consists of the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, the Ta'ang National Liberation Army, and the Arirang Army, announced a unilateral ceasefire to support quick response for 1 month. However, the military government had refused to do the same until Wednesday's announcement. Since the military junta's coup in 2021, Myanmar has been marred by violence amid a civil war between the military government and ethnic militias and resistance forces. As the country continues recovery and relief efforts, a hotel worker who had been buried under the rubble in Naypyidaw was rescued after 108 hours. The 26-year-old hotel employee was found alive by a rescue team, covered in dust but conscious. He was immediately transported to the hospital for medical treatment. Local media says the death toll from the devastating earthquake has now surpassed 3,000. 이승재, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced a major expansion of offensives in the Gaza Strip, aiming to increase pressure on Hamas to release the remaining hostages. On Wednesday local time, Netanyahu also mentioned establishing a new security corridor called the Mora Corridor through southern regions between Rafah and Khan Yunis. The Israeli defense minister has also announced a significant expansion of military operations in Gaza involving the occupation of large areas of land. Meanwhile, overnight airstrikes have claimed the lives of more than 40 Palestinians. A strike on a United Nations Relief and Works Agency shelter for displaced individuals resulted in the death of 19 people, according to Gaza's health ministry. Israel said it attacked a Hamas command center set up in the facility. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is making his first trip to Europe since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against him in November 2024 for alleged war crimes in Gaza. China has concluded 2 days of large-scale military exercises around Taiwan, intensifying regional tensions. Taiwan condemned the drills, vowing to maintain regional peace. The People's Liberation Army conducted the Straight Thunder 2025 A drills on April 1st and 2nd, focusing on the Taiwan Strait and the East China Sea. These exercises included live fire drills and simulated precision strikes, targeting key infrastructure such as ports and energy facilities. The Shandong aircraft carrier was also deployed and operated east of Taiwan, integrating naval and air units. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense reported that multiple warships and aircraft crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait, prompting the island to deploy its own rapid response exercise. The United States condemned the drills, while China's Eastern Theater Command stated that the exercises achieved their objectives. Moving over to Europe, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced on Wednesday local time that during the first quarter of 2025, NATO allies pledged over $21 billion in military aid to Ukraine. Rutte stated that the NATO command in Germany, specifically the NATO Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine, would continue to coordinate military aid to Ukraine and the training of Ukrainian soldiers. The announcement comes ahead of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels on Thursday and Friday, where further support measures for Ukraine are set to be discussed. In the United States, renowned actor Val Kilmer passed away on Tuesday night at the age of 65. The cause of death was complications from pneumonia. Kilmer had previously battled throat cancer diagnosed in 2014, which significantly impacted his health and career. He was celebrated for his performances in iconic films, including Top Gun, in which he played the character Iceman. He also played the role of the Caped Crusader in Batman Forever. Kilmer is survived by 2 children, Mercedes and Jack Kilmer, who continue his artistic legacy in the acting industry. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Today, the temperatures rose rapidly under the warm sunlight. The daytime temperature in Seoul reached 17 degrees Celsius today. Tomorrow, it will be as warm as today, with Seoul rising up to 16 degrees. However, there's a more than 10 degrees temperature gaps between the daily highs and lows. Please take care of your health in this weather. With typical warm spring weather, fine dust has covered the skies. The ultrafine dust in Seoul, southern parts of Gyeonggi-do Province, and Chungcheongnam-do Province will stay at bad levels tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Seoul, Daejeon, and Busan will start off at 6 degrees, Chuncheon and Gyeongju at 2 degrees. Highs will move up to 18 degrees in Chuncheon, Daejeon, Gwangju, and Daegu. There's more rain forecast across the country on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Do stay with us for our panel discussion.